The Enchanted Princess. Once upon a time there was an old cabinet maker who had two sons. One was called Helmer, the other Hans. Helmer was an idle good-for-nothing who used to wheedle out of his father the little money he earned so that he could spend it on all sorts of useless things. Hans did his best to help his father all he could by making himself useful to people, and in that way he earned a little extra money for the family to spend on food. But as sometimes happens, the cabinet maker and his wife thought less of the hard-working, gentle Hans, who never had much to say and went quietly about his business, than of the impudent, devil-may-care Helmer. With his hearty laugh and his merry tales, he was the apple of his father's eye and his mother's. No matter how thoughtless and selfish he was, his parents never punished him. One morning, when there was hardly any food in the house and not enough money to buy any more, the old cabinet maker decided to go to the town. There were many rich men there who had not yet paid him for furniture he had made for them. "It's high time they paid me what they owe me," he muttered to himself when he reached the town. But each time he knocked on the fine carved door of a rich man's house, it was answered by a haughty footman who told him that his master was far too busy to bother with such unimportant matters as paying bills. And every fine carved door he knocked on was slammed in his face with a bang. That evening, the old cabinet maker left the town tired, angry, and disappointed. On the way home, he had to pass an inn, because he dared not face his wife with a purse that was as empty as when he had set out that morning. He decided to rest for a while on the steps of the inn, hoping that some miracle would rescue him from all his troubles. In his thoughts, he cursed all rich people who, of course, would at that moment be sitting down to splendid meals, while his poor empty stomach had to be content with the smells of cooking that came drifting out through the window of the inn's kitchen. Inside, in the tap room, a crowd of regular customers were pressing round a traveller who had just arrived. Through the open window, the cabinet maker heard snatches of the exciting tales the traveller was telling. Suddenly, the cabinet maker caught his breath. He pushed closer to the window so as not to miss anything of what the stranger was saying. So it was that the old cabinet maker came to hear the story of a wondrously beautiful princess who was held captive by a wicked wizard. An old woman watched over the castle where the princess had been locked away. This old woman gave everyone who called at the castle 3 tasks to perform. Whoever succeeded in performing these tasks would not only have the castle and all the treasures it contained, but would also receive the hand of the beautiful princess in marriage. But anyone who accepted the task and could not complete them would pay for it with his life. The old cabinet maker became very excited as he listened to the traveller. This was the chance he had been waiting for. Now his family could leave their poverty and misery behind. His Helmer, his clever Helmer, would surely be able to complete the old woman's 3 tasks. Then his smart son would marry a real princess. He had quite forgotten his cares, his hunger, and his empty purse. "We'll show them all," he grinned to himself, thinking of the footmen who slammed the doors in his face. "We'll wipe the sneers off their faces." Tripping over himself in his haste, the old man hurried home. There he told his wife, who had been worrying because he had been away so long, what he had heard at the inn. "He will have to hurry," the old man said, "because there are bound to be many other young men from these parts trying their luck now. He must set off early tomorrow morning." At first, his wife did not want their son to go. But when her husband reminded her of the magnificent castle and the beautiful princess their Helmer was going to marry, she soon agreed. "I'll go and get some food ready for him to take," she said, and shuffled off to the pantry to see if she could make anything worth eating out of the leftovers. When the old cabinet maker had told Helmer what he had heard, the ambitious boy was very excited by the story and by his father's plan, and was eager to be off. "The horse stands ready, saddled for you," said the old man. "If you hurry, you will be at the castle before all the others from this part of the country." The young man nodded. "I shan't be away long," he said to his mother. "In a few days I shall come back to fetch you in a coach drawn by 6 fine white horses." He did not think for a moment that he could fail. Soon Helmer was on his way. He urged his horse into a gallop, and before long he was riding through a part of the country where he had never been before. "Here I come, Prince Helmer the Great," he called at the top of his voice, striking with his whip at the branches of trees as he passed, so that the birds all flew out, chattering and chirping in fright. The nearer he came to the castle, the more beautiful the countryside around him became. But Helmer took no notice of the scenery. Impatiently, he urged his horse on, faster and faster. When the animal stopped before an ant-hill that stood in the middle of the path, he deliberately rode through the middle of it. "Make way for Helmer!" he shouted in an angry voice, and flicked his whip at some ants that dared to creep up his horse's legs. On and on he journeyed, riding thoughtlessly and never giving his horse a chance to rest. After a time he came to a lake where 12 snow-white ducks were swimming. When they caught sight of Helmer and his horse, the ducks left the water and waddled inquisitively up the bank. "Out of the way, you stupid creatures!" he shouted, and sprang straight from his horse and snatched up a handful of stones. He pelted the poor harmless birds until all were dead, except one that managed to fly away in time. Not far from the lake, Helmer came upon something else in his path that annoyed him. It was a beehive full of buzzing bees. As he galloped on, he aimed a kick at the hive and knocked it over. "Wretched creatures!" he grumbled as he glanced back at the hive. "How can I see where I'm going with them swarming all around?" He had quite forgotten that it was these wretched creatures that made the honey he liked to spread on his bread. Towards evening, Helmer reached the castle. It was a magnificent building. The roofs were gilded, and the windows shone in the setting sun like the purest crystal. Blood-red roses bloomed in the garden, and jasmine spread an intoxicating scent. Helmer jumped from his horse and looked about him. There was not a living soul to be seen, and, except for the panting of his poor tired horse, there was not a sound to be heard either. "That's good. I must be the first here," he muttered, and he gave the stout door a kick. "Hey there, open up," he called to the old woman who had appeared at one of the windows. "It's me, Helmer the Great. I've come to set the beautiful princess free." The old woman sniffed disdainfully. "Come back tomorrow morning," she said. "You will still be the first." And with that, she closed the shutter over the window with a bang. There was nothing for it but to wait until the morning. Helmer tethered his horse to a tree and settled down as best he could to sleep. The next morning, Helmer went to the castle gate again. Before long out came the old woman he had seen the night before. She was carrying a sack of linseed. While Helmer looked on surprised, she scattered the tiny seeds on the ground. "Young man," she said gravely, "I shall return in 1 hour. By that time, all the seeds must be back in the sack. Remember, you are not to leave a single seed lying on the ground." Helmer gave a scornful laugh. What did the old woman think? That he, the Helmer who had come to free the princess, was going to spend his time picking up seeds? Oh no, he was much too important a fellow to do that sort of thing. Besides, he couldn't bend down with his armor on, one of his more extravagant purchases, and he did not really think it was worth taking it all off for such a senseless task. When the hour was up and the old lady returned, the seeds were still lying on the ground exactly where she had scattered them. Scornfully, she looked first at the empty sack and then at Helmer. "I can't say you have really tried very hard," she mocked. "Perhaps you will have better fortune with the next task." The old woman took out 12 gold keys and threw them in the castle moat. "I shall return in 1 hour. By the time, all the keys must be on the bank." Helmer broke off the branch of a tree and fished about in the water, trying to get one of the keys onto the bank. But all that came up was mud. When the woman returned after an hour, Helmer was sitting dripping wet on the grass. "Haven't you found the keys?" she asked, although the look on her face showed she had not expected anything else. "Come with me. We're going inside." Helmer followed the woman through glittering chambers and galleries until they came to a room where there stood the figures of 3 women draped from head to foot in cloth. "I'm going to leave you here by yourself," said the old woman. "I shall return in 1 hour. Then you must point to one of the figures. If the one you choose is good and kind, you will be happy all your life long. But if the one you pick is evil, then your misfortune will be great." "What a foolish task," thought Helmer, who had learned nothing from failing in the first 2. When the old woman returned at the end of an hour, Helmer pointed to one of the figures at random. "Oh, I chose the right-hand one," he muttered, not really caring. At that moment, the 3 figures began to move. They threw back the cloths that concealed them, and for a fleeting moment Helmer saw the wondrously beautiful face of the girl in the middle, and that she was looking at him with tears in her eyes. Then Helmer was seized by 2 monsters, for these are what had been standing draped in cloth on either side of the beautiful princess. The monsters dragged him to the window in their fierce claws and hurled him into a deep chasm. As Helmer fell, their evil laughter echoed and echoed 1,000 times around the walls of the chasm. In the next moment, the castle, the beautiful princess, and the women had completely disappeared. Over a year went by. The old cabinet maker and his wife had waited every day in vain for the coach that Helmer had promised to come and fetch them in. "Let me go and look for him, father," said Hans one morning. "Perhaps my brother is being held prisoner in the castle. I could at least try to set him free." "You?" answered his father with a laugh. "Don't talk nonsense, boy. You don't really think you are braver or more clever than Helmer, do you?" With that, he went to sit in his place by the window, where he could keep watch, for he still hoped that his favorite son would return one day. Hans, however, had made up his mind to go and look for his brother, so one moonlit night, when his father and mother were fast asleep, he crept quietly out of the house. He set off on the road to the castle without a horse, without food, and without money for the journey, but in good spirits. On the way, he ate bilberries and blackberries and drank crystal clear water from mountain streams. At night, he slept on soft moss under the trees. He dreamed of smiling girls with garlands of flowers in their hair. They showed him to a golden throne where a princess with golden hair was waiting for him. The girls sang and danced prettily around him, while the beautiful king's daughter put a golden crown on his head. In the mornings, when the rays of the early sun touched his face, he would wake refreshed from sleep and begin the new day in a cheerful mood. After he had been on the road for some time, Hans came to a part of the country where he had never been before. tall, stately beech trees grew in great numbers here. The sun shone through their leaves and made patterns of gold on the mossy ground, and in the beech woods it was as solemn and still as in a church. Beyond the woods, he came to wide meadows filled with flowers, where hundreds of insects buzzed and hummed and whirred, and bright butterflies danced to and fro. Hans was so delighted with this lovely countryside that he raised his arms in the air and danced with pure happiness. "How wonderful life is!" he called. "And how beautiful it is out here in the country!" Whistling, he tramped on while the birds followed him on his way. "I'm Hans, the son of the cabinet maker, and I'm on my way to the great castle," the lad called out in an excited voice to the birds. "Are you coming with me?" The birds answered by flying along in front of him. It was as if they wanted to show him the way. Now Hans followed heavily behind them until it was evening, and then his new friend sang him to sleep in the glow of the setting sun. The next morning, when he had been on the road a little while, he came upon an ant hill that had been trampled on. The little creatures were busy repairing their home. Hans bent down to help them with their work. Although he was bitten once or twice for his pains, he did not let this spoil his happy mood. He set the ants that had crawled onto him carefully back on the ground and continued on his way. He came to a lake where 12 snow-white ducks were swimming. Hans threw them crumbs from the bread a farmer had given him on his journey. Not far from the lake, he came upon an overtuned beehive, which he at once put the right way up again. When he next looked up, he saw the castle in front of him in all its splendor. The roofs gleamed gold, and the windows shone like crystals, so brightly that Hans had to shade his eyes. Shyly he approached. Only the thought of the princess in his dream gave him the courage to knock on the great door. "I'm Hans, the son of the cabinet maker," he said to the old woman who appeared at the window. "I have dreamed of a beautiful princess, and I want to set her free." The old woman came outside. She looked at the shy young fellow and smiled. "Of course you can try to set her free, for everyone has the same chance. You must complete 3 tasks, and if you don't succeed, it will cost you your life." Hans screwed up all his courage and said bravely, "I'm willing to take the risk. Good lady, tell me what I must do." The old woman brought out a sack of linseed, and while Hans looked on in surprise, she scattered the tiny seeds on the ground. "Young man," she said gravely, "I shall return in 1 hour. By the time, all the seeds must be back in the sack." Hans got straight down on his knees and began to gather up the seeds. He had only just started when a great host of ants approached. The ants immediately began to help put the seeds back in the sack. "This is going well," he thought to himself when he saw how quickly the sack was filling up. When the old woman returned, Not a single seed was left on the ground. "You have done very well," she said to the boy. "Perhaps you will be able to complete the next task too." With that, she took out 12 gold keys and threw them one by one into the castle moat. "I shall return in 1 hour. By that time, all the keys must be back on the bank. Remember, you are not to leave a single key in the water." Hans had looked on in amazement as the keys sank into the dark depths of the moat. However, he did not hesitate long. With a powerful spring, he dived into the water to tackle his second task and bring the keys up to the bank. He rooted about with his fingers among the stalks of the water plants, but try as he might, he couldn't find even one of the keys. Out of breath and very disappointed, he clambered up onto the bank. He grew afraid when he thought of the terrible fate that must await him now. Then, suddenly, he heard the sound of wings beating strongly in the air, and before he really knew what was happening, he saw 12 snow-white ducks land on the water. They were the ducks he had seen on his journey to the castle and had fed with crumbs of bread. They had come to help him out of gratitude, just as the ants had done before with the seeds. Quacking noisily, they upped their tails and dived and dabbled, and it was not long before there were 12 keys lying on the bank, gleaming in the sun. When the old woman returned after an hour, Hans was sitting on the grass, dripping wet and very happy. "Have you found all the keys?" she asked, but the look on her face showed she had not expected anything else. Hans looked at her, his face all smiles. "The ducks helped me," he said in his honest way. "I couldn't have done it all by myself." He hoped that the old woman would not be angry about this, for she had not actually said anything about help. However, she seemed not to have heard his words. "Come with me. We're going inside," she said, taking the young man by the hand. Hans followed the old woman along a wide corridor with tall, slender pillars of marble. He followed her through glittering chambers and galleries until they came to a room where there stood the figures of 3 women draped from head to foot in cloth so that their faces could not be seen. "I'm going to leave you here by yourself," said the old woman. "I shall return in 1 hour. Then you must point to one of the figures. If the one you choose is good and kind, you will be happy all your life long. But if the one you pick is evil, then your misfortune will be great." "What a hard task," thought Hans, looking at the 3 figures that stood there motionless. He closed his eyes and tried to think things out. While he racked his brains trying to decide which one to choose, he heard a great humming sound coming quickly nearer and nearer. "Choose the middle one, choose the middle one," buzzed the bees who had come from the hive he had righted on his journey, and the whole swarm began to fly around the head of the figure in the middle. "Choose the middle one, she will be your bride." When the old woman returned at the end of an hour, Hans pointed straight away at the middle figure. "I choose her," he said rather shyly, and that moment the 3 figures began to move. They threw back the cloths that had concealed them, and for a fleeting moment Hans saw the two fearsome monsters that had been waiting on either side of the princess. They dragged themselves to the window and hurled themselves down into the deep chasm. Their dreadful cries echoed and echoed 1,000 times around the walls of the ravine. The beautiful princess walked across the room to Hans, laughing and crying at the same time. So happy was she to be free at last. It was not long after this that the marriage of Hans and his princess was celebrated. On the day before the wedding, Hans sent a golden coach, drawn by 6 white horses, to bring his old father and mother to the feast. The end.